Afterwards, we might hear from y'all what you guys think. Everybody seems to have an opinion on this topic. And just as a way of quick introduction, my name is Klancher. I'm the author of the Red Tractors series books. If you haven't seen them, be sure and come see us. And I'll tell you all about them, believe me. Today, I'm really privileged to be here with George Russell. George grew up on a farm, and he's a longtime industry executive. He was with IH from 1975 to 1982. He also was with Case IH from 1989 to 2006, and spent 24 years working for the manufacturer and another 19 years as an industry advisor. Really more importantly for my involvement for George is he is a real student of the industry. He's one of these people who's really interested in the forces that made things work, why were things done the way they were, and he was a big help in our book, Red Four-Wheel Drive Tractors. He wrote the foreword and kind of provided a lot of guiding principles, so when I'm trying to understand what happened in a particular period, I've got somebody great to pull from. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to George to talk a little bit about his background.
So Lee says I'm a student of the industry.
But not of technology. Right? That's me, sorry.
How's that going? Is that better?
Okay, well, let's just use that. You got the gears off? Yeah. Okay. That one's good. You gotta
So,
you want to try again? Yeah, sure.
let's turn that one on. Is that working better? Y'all here now?
Yes.
All right. So, I'm a student of the industry. I'm going to be a teacher right now. Who's the guy on the screen? What's the significance of that person?
John Deere.
John Deere. Why do I put that on the screen? Well, about three reasons. One is just to get us going this morning. That always gets red folks' blood boil a little bit when you get John Deere, right? Also, one of the things that we're going to talk about in the top 10 tractors in many cases is the reaction to Deere or being ahead of Deere. So that's another reason to have it. But also, I come from Vermont. And John Deere was born in Vermont. In fact, in the town where we've got a family farm that's been in our family since 1788, the next town down has Middlebury, Vermont, has a historic marker right out in front of the town green. It says, "The plow that broke the prairies," because John Deere had one of his two blacksmith shops there, and then he also, the second one is in Burlington, Vermont, where I live now. So that gave me the interest in history and farm equipment, started with John Deere. I also confess that the first tractor I drove was a John Deere A, because my dad owned half a John Deere dealership. He's a pretty smart guy. He saw the light, he sold it out, and he's been red ever since. He's passed away now, but over the years I've driven tractors he's had: 706, 806, 1206, 656 Hydro, 4166, 2+2. So we've been all red. And we'll relate some of that here as we go through that. But my career, so I come from a farm background, interest in history, but I've also been fortunate in my career to be at many different places of inflection points in the industry or things related to different product lines, red product lines. Over my career, I've been a product director or product manager for almost every product line. So we're here in the South. A nice display here with the cotton pickers back there in the back of the room. I was a product director when we chose to discontinue the two-row cotton picker, the 2022. You're required to keep 10 years of parts when you discontinue a model. That was really significant because 6 months later, we started a joint venture in Uzbekistan to build cotton pickers using those parts there. There are 3 manufacturers in the world of cotton pickers: John Deere, Case IH, and this company in Uzbekistan. I was also in charge of the combines when we put on the yield monitors, which has led to the advanced farming system. Involved with the purchase of Concord when we got involved with more products like those. And I'll talk about some other things here. But today we're here to talk about tractors. And when I came back to the company, I left IH in 1982, went back to farm with my dad, sell computers to the dairy farmers. I came back in the industry in 1989. So I missed the Case and International coming together. So I could legitimately say to an IH guy, well, I started with IH. But if it's a Case guy, I'd say, well, I started with Case, because actually I started with them too. So I could play it both ways for a while. But my first job was, with Case IH, was product director for Magnums and Steigers. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But our purpose here is to look at, historically, going back to this picture, of the what's happened in the industry. My first exposure with the company as a territory rep was the introduction of the 86 series tractors. So that switch was pretty significant when we did that, and we'll talk a little bit about the 86 a little bit later.
So the inspiration for this little presentation comes from my background with the Red Tractors book and a new book I'm working on called Tractor. And for Tractor, it's all brands, and I had to pick out, and it goes 1 to about 180, and it sort of ranks what are the most significant tractors. So I've been thinking about that a lot as I'm putting together this book. And I started thinking about what are the most significant red tractors. And in fact, some of you are probably aware there was a discussion on the Red Power Forum about that, and a lot of debate, and it's something kind of fun that certainly everyone has their opinion. And this is just a table of contents. That's a great picture of Howard on a tractor ride. One of the things that I want to talk a little bit about before we get into the countdown is what makes the tractor significant. Because you can pick your top 10, and it might be your top 10 favorite tractors. It might be your top 10 tractors that were mistakes. There's a lot of ways to do it. We're looking at tractors that made a significant change in the industry, and that's the point for the book. Obviously, the Heart Bar number 3 you're seeing here would be, one of the tractors that signified a change. And in some cases, it might be a tractor that wasn't a big seller and wasn't successful, but signified another change. So, without further ado, number 10. And where I started was the International 560. And for this book, one of the really interesting things was looking at the 560 closer. And of course, we've been through it in about 3 books. The 560 got so much press around the recall. But the fact of the matter was, the tractor itself was a big step the company needed. The styling in particular, I think, was amazing. This is a Lowy drawing of an early one. Obviously, it's not quite the style they came with, but the styling of that 560 is phenomenal. The feature set on it was great. Tractor was an effective tractor, and the recall, it got publicized heavily, and it's turned into this thing of, oh, that was the moment it went bad. But very few of them failed in the field. Almost all of them were replaced, and most of them worked long, good lives. So the 560 was not the failure that was expected. The thing that was the problem with the 560, and especially as I look at the whole industry, was horsepower. I think it was 56 or 58 horsepower, and the market needed 80, 100 horsepower at that time. They were behind that, but there just wasn't enough power, and there was even an Oliver at that time that had more power. One note, same size. One note, this was the time, and when they rolled this out, this was a time when IH did these absolutely phenomenal introductions, and the 560s was one where they pulled out all the stops. They had a famous dancing troupe. They had this big display. They had square dancing 460s. I'm sure a lot of you have seen those pictures. So they really knocked it out. And that's a theme we'll be touching on, both horsepower and how the company introduces things.
So the next tractor is Quadtrac. And here's an early conceptual drawing of Quadtrac. So we're jumping quite far ahead. The significance here of the Quadtrac is back in the early 90s when we were first working on it, there was only one other manufacturer that had a tractor on tracks. Who was that? Caterpillar. That Challenger was actually designed as a missile carrier for mobile missiles, and Cat had a contract to do that. They turned it into a tractor. So the folks at Fargo, in their garages, in their off-site location, worked, and then behind places where people couldn't see it from the road, developed a Quadtrac. My first time driving it was in 1990. Went up to Fargo as and for a product meeting. Paul Nyston, the engineer, said, "George, I'd like to show you something." We went out up north in the River Valley, and I first drove it there. That was in 1990. It took a long time to actually achieve and get launched commercially, but today, every single tractor manufacturer has some kind of track option, including John Deere, who came out with their Quadtrac just within the recent past. They're still stumbling a bit about it, but this has some significance because of that, a better way to get power to the ground. The other thing that was interesting was related to the innovation DNA that is in red, and how Bob Carlson, who was then came from Deere, came to Case IH and was running Case IH, wanted to take advantage of this Quadtrac as an innovation. It wasn't ready for the market, but he wanted to know, the industry to know, that this tractor was coming. And so, some of you may have gone to the Farm Progress Show in 1992, where the Quadtrac was first launched to the world. You had to go in behind, in minutes behind some fences, which you see there. The tractor was actually underground in that barn. There was a little pitch going ahead of time, and then at the right time, it came up out of the ground, and there it was. Stands were full at every session. Bob Carlson also knew that Deere has, like they do at the Axial Flow, they often try to claim they did something that somebody else did. So when Deere introduced their rotary combine, you'd think that they invented it. Bob Carlson actually had these t-shirts made up to give to the people at the show that showed the Quadtrac and the date. So there'd be no question about who introduced the Quadtrac. So that, competition, red and green, the spirit of innovation, that launch, you kind of see with the Case IH was evident in the Quadtrac.
All right, now we have number 8, and I'm just window dressing on this next one. Should be a popular choice, 1206. Go ahead, George.
So, I'll tell you a story about my dad. So he had an 806, and he always liked to have the first one, so whenever IH would introduce a new tractor, he'd go to Cartmel Sales and Service, and the salesman would come out and introduced him said 1206 is coming. He says, I'll have one of those. So at that time, tractor prices were going up, inflation was pretty high. He actually traded in his 806 after 3 years for the same price that he bought it for. There had been such an inflation in used equipment prices that he basically got everything that he put into it in the 806. That 1206 isn't that a good looking tractor. It's the way a tractor ought to look. And that switch though technically from an 806 to a 1206, which is the first turbocharged row crop tractor in the industry. There were other tractors over 100 horsepower, but not turbocharged, so this could run rings around a John Deere 5020. And that ability for the IH engineering to put in the more robust crankshafts, the turbocharge that you see on it, the more robust drivetrain, enabled that tractor to have the reliability in pushing the horsepower limits, which of course is the trend you see in the industry, is how do I get more horsepower and how to get more horsepower to the ground. So the 1206 came in a lot of different variants. It's near the top in my list just because, like I said, it looks like a proper tractor.
Next we found we couldn't quite get to 10. So, or apparently we can't count, one of the two. So we did a couple of honorable mentions. And one of the tractors, as we were talking about this, that came up is the 1066. And certainly that 5 million number was a huge mark for the company. The line also, in my mind, had kind of a couple things going on. They were a little lagging on transmission, but the 66 also had some features that were important. Is there anything to add to that, George?
Yeah, one of the things that Ron Schmidt, the dealer that talked yesterday about their dealership, their IH dealership in Nebraska, is he in the room today?
He's on tour right now.
He's on tour. If you listen to him, he talked about an interesting thing about the 66 series and the change that happened in the industry. And in fact, it was caused a lot part by Deere's focus on on some of the creature comforts, the ergonomics, the human factors engineering to make it easier to spend all day on a tractor. You kind of see that trend in the industry as well. The point he made yesterday was at the beginning of the 66 series, almost none of them were sold with cabs. But by the end of it, and including the 5 millionth tractor, almost all of them had cabs. So you started seeing that shift from an open station to a cab tractor. And of course, that's a trend later on is the evolution of cabs. So there's significance to that for that reason.
Absolutely. Our next one is another honorable mention, and this was the hydro. There's no one who were talking, that innovation in transmission was a big deal. Power to the ground was a big deal at that time, and having infinitely variable transmission everybody knew was the goal. And this came, of course, from the HT340, which was the turbine-powered tractor developed when they bought solar. And so they never made the turbine engine, obviously, but they did introduce this transmission on the 656, which is also, as you guys know, an interesting model because it was so transitional. There was a lot of things that appeared on this. But the hydro was a significant piece.
If you're not familiar with solar, next time you're in San Diego, you can drive down along the waterfront there and you'll see Caterpillar owns a gas turbine factory there. That used to be an International Harvester factory when they bought solar turbines. So that's what Lee's referring to there.
Yeah, and the HT340 is in Penfield right now in the museum near Rantoul. So if you go to Half Century of Farm Progress and head over to the museum, you can get a look at it. It's a beautiful tractor. And number 7, this should be a popular one, Farmall A. So obviously the Farmall A had a lot of significance on a number of ways. The letter series, one of the most significant lines in IH history, the Lowy designing, the long development cycle, but also with the A, they were really figuring out that along with, there's of course the big tractor market, the small tractor market was opening up. And if you go back, starting in the teens up to this point when this came out, the small tractor was a real innovation. Early on, they were big and bulky, and they were trying to figure out how do we make one small enough that work for small farmers, and not just the guy with 80 or 100 acres back then, which was a big farm, but the guy with 10 or 20 that might be doing cotton or doing tobacco. So this had a huge impact there. Also, just the fact that so many of them were produced per day. That Louisville plant set a record for the amount of tractors produced per day. There was I believe it was a Time magazine piece about that the production was insane.
Yeah, if you fly into Louisville, if you're not familiar with it, fly into the Louisville airport. That was IH bought a former defense plant right alongside the Louisville airport, which is where the Louisville plant came into. Producing Duckheads and a bunch of smaller tractors, particularly here for the South, which was appropriate.
Absolutely.
So, 50 series, very significant in terms of the engineering that was put into the 50 series. The lingo in the company at that time, because IH was starting to have some problems, was called meaningful competitive advantage. That was the word used, and the strategic concept is how are we going to get a meaningful competitive advantage against any of our competitors. In the case of tractors, it was John Deere. So a lot of investment, $200 million plus in the 50 series program. It was an all-new transmission. In fact, there were 3 transmissions on the drawing board going back to the 656 and the hydro. IH had experience, of course, with hydrostatic transmissions. So though only one of the 3 transmissions was introduced, there were 2 others that were hydromechanical, which were not launched. But later in the evolution of tractors, you now see today CVT, continuously variable transmissions. So that's another evolution. But at the time of the 50 series, that investment in a power shift or a transmission that had stepped ranges, so a logical progression of gears, and that's how we used to sell it against Deere in their overlap of ranges, and the fact that there were some gears that were missing that were not used. We could talk in the 50 series about the design, the logical transmission design. There were some other things that were pretty significant: the mid-mount clutch, the full oil bath, the precision ground gears as related to the transmission, the forward airflow, which is one of those things that it has so many advantages. It was introduced on the 50 series. You never saw it on many other tractors, but the fact that the tractor's side shields were there to control the airflow around the engine is something that you see on almost all tractors today. The other thing that was important was the cab. Going back to creature comforts, on the 86 series, you started to see a better design cab, and it continued in the 50 series. There's one other non-product factor in the 50 series that was important, and that was Harvester's reliance on durable, reliable designs. And that was, in the engineering world, is called mean time between failures. It's a way to test a tractor and actually put a number around durability and reliability. And so that came into the company at the time of the 50 series, which led to the robust testing and a certainty that you had a tractor that would live for a long time. And so that 50 series also set that. And you can now then draw a direct line from the 50 series to the reliability of red big tractors today because of that point as well. So some non-product features. The other thing about the 50 series, of course, is the last tractor built at Farmall after the purchase by Tenneco of International Harvester and the combination with Case was a 5488, the last tractor off the line. So, of course, pretty sentimental about that.
Absolutely, and obviously that turning point, the last tractor, that's when you have to have a number. The next one is a honorable mention, and this is a project George was a part of that not a lot of people know about. Go ahead.
So I mentioned meaningful competitive advantage. When I started out with the company, I came from the Vermont, the Northeast, big hay and forage area. Harvester had in works the big tractors, started working with Steiger, of course the axial flow, but where Harvester was never really had a strong presence was in the hay and forage area. So I was actually part of a special task force that started in 1977. Our objective for 6 months was to travel all around the country and the continent looking for the next innovation in hay and forage harvesting machines. At that time, IH had the 241 big roll baler because big roll round balers were on. Heston had the stack hand, but our objective was to leapfrog and find the next innovation and be there. The company wanted to have a full line of products and be competitive in every area. Out of that research started a group called Advanced Harvesting Systems, of which I was the marketing member. There were also engineers. Greg Montgomery, that Lee knows very well and you can see in all the books, was the industrial designer in that group. In addition to engineers, there were also animal scientists and agronomists, as well as all the other functions. So we were meant to be a skunk works, if you will, to develop this technology, which had it been launched would have been called ProBine, Protein Combine. AHS stands for Advanced Harvesting Systems. Here is a picture of that Greg did. Here's a 2+2 pulling, in this case, a pull-type version of it. The concept is any growing plant is 80% moisture. And in the haying process, you're trying to dry it down to a storable area, either in silage from 30-40% or hay, something between 15 and 20%. What the ProBine did was take the growing plant, it would macerate the cells, meaning break the cells open, squeeze the moisture out, take the moisture and coagulate it, meaning trying to get the protein as a separate part of it. So now in the liquid portion you had protein and you had most of the moisture that had N, P, and K. And you would dump that back on the ground as soon as the process was going. So as the machine went through the field, it would macerate the cells, coagulate the protein, and have 3 fractions. The liquid portion gets dumped right back on the ground. It's got NP&K, so it's a fertilizer, and it gets rid of a lot of the mass. The protein gets stored in little tanks here. That's liquid protein equivalent to soybean meal, 44% protein. And then the fiber fraction gets blown into the wagon, and it's got the same nutritive value as haylage. You actually had a better advantage doing this when it was rained on because of the moisture on the crop than drying things down. So had it been introduced, it would have been a game changer for the company. It was actually done, process continues today in France with stationary machines, but we actually built, and here is a field-going prototype. This is in University of Wisconsin, River Falls, where we actually had a field-going prototype of the machine that worked. It didn't come to market because that was when harvesters started getting into real financial problems, and of course we know the story there.
And one of the really interesting things about that particular time period was the significance of that technology.
Sorry.
We won't go back.
Go back.
Now you've given it all away. It's okay. To my point, at that time, you know, when Archie McCardle came in, one of the things, and Archie's a figure, he was the CEO from, I think it was about 79 to 84, and he's a person that gets a lot of different opinions. And certainly did some things that weren't in the best interest of the company, but he also did some things that absolutely saved it. And one of the things he was very good at is funneling money into research. So Dr. Glenn Colley, who was the chief engineer when the 50 series was introduced and then was instrumental at the Magnum, one of the things he said at the company at the time was that whenever they had an idea for a new project, he said, just go see McCardle and your project will get, if it's something high-tech and something interesting and something that's going to bring the product to the front of the room, so to speak, instead of being second, it would put them ahead of Deere. He said if you went in with a project like that, McCardle would find it, and one of his fellow VPs said that he had a money tree in his yard somewhere, because he would find money for technology.
Well, let me just add on to that. This advanced harvesting systems was clearly an example of what Lee's was talking about. The only time I met Brooks McCormick was when he was the chairman of IH, and Archie McCardle brought he and Bob Potter was the senior VP for technology out to see what we were working on in this advanced harvesting systems. And McCardle obviously had that interest in technology, and he wanted to make sure the chair was there as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. He came from Xerox, so that was a big piece of it. All right, number 5, we're going to go back in history a little bit. As you all know, to the International 4366. And this tractor is significant, I think, less so for IH than it is for Steiger. So, which obviously later becomes very significant for IH. So this tractor was a joint project, and when Steiger was trying to grow in the early 70s, that company was struggling really hard. They had gotten about $6 million over about 2 years, and they blew it in about 18 months. It was gone. So they were barely making it. And for a company to start from nothing to be a heavy equipment manufacturer is an almost impossible task without somebody with very deep pockets. And they had the family that sold Bobcat, the Melrose, but the Melrose didn't have deep enough pockets for a $20 or $100 million investment. They had $5 million. So with that money gone, the people that ran Steiger very smartly thought if we could do some contract building for another company that needs our machines, we can survive. So one of the ones the conversations went well with was IH. And IH had been struggling to do a decent four-wheel drive since 1960, when Brooks McCormick saw Wagner, freaked out, and said, we got to do something, and they rushed that 4300 to production. It was a project done by Ho, one of their subsidiaries, and it was not really a farm tractor at all. It was a big industrial machine. So that didn't work. The 4100 was put together very quickly. It was an adequate machine, but that wasn't a groundbreaker, so they needed something. So when Steiger came to them, they said, yeah, this would be great. This particular picture is the very first one rolling off actually that was built in a shop, and the 3 guys who built it. So Steiger had this history of putting young, smart people to work on very big projects. And the guy on the right is Paul Nystuen. Paul at the time was, I believe, just out of college. I think he had just graduated, and he as a freshman had come in and worked for them drawing the first Wildcat. The first day he showed up, he was a college kid. He showed up at work and they gave him a yellow pad and a pencil and they said, our new Wildcat, we just built it. We don't have any engineering drawings to make it in the factory. Can you draw that the next few days? And he did that. Well, Paul also on this project, they said, hey, we just made this deal with IH. We're going to produce these 4366s. IH wants some of their parts in it. Could you go make that? And they put him with 2 other guys who were master metal workers. And as you probably know, Steiger had a history. They had these people that were just fantastic at building things with steel. The middle one, the short guy, is Jerry Joubert, and I forget the other guy's name. They were both veterans. They both knew how to work steel. And Paul was a very, very bright young engineer. He did later become the chief engineer, and actually is one of the people that helped create Quadtrac. He and 2 other guys. So the 4366 in my mind, and then Steiger took the money for the contract. They got a contract to build, it was about 2,200 machines over, I think it was a 3-year period. It was a big contract. They had enough money to go build that Fargo plant. So they took the money from that contract, they built that big Fargo plant, and I don't think they would have had a very hard time making the leap to the success they had in the late 70s without it. It also gave IH a very solid machine. This still wasn't a game changer, but 4366, once they worked out the engine, there was some serious issues with the engines early on, which was an IH problem. But they sorted that out. It was a solid machine.
So Paul Nystuen was key on the philosophy at a small company like Steiger to get to the market quickly was really a hallmark of this project as well as Quadtrac. The other thing that was significant about the 4366 was it did use IH components, the engine and the bar axles, and it also began the coordination between the Hinsdale engineering and Fargo engineering, which when I started back in 1989, there was a good coordination between that, exchange of ideas. So you had 2 engineering organizations, came from different places. You wanted to see from Steiger kind of that entrepreneurial ability to get things done, and that helped speed up some of the folks at Burridge and Hinsdale. They used to be called Hinsdale, then it was changed to Burridge. They called the name Burridge because one of the engineers said, Hinsdale's getting a bad name. It's actually located in Burridge, so why don't we just change the name to Burridge? We're not changing the place where it is, but it's no longer called Hinsdale, it's called Burridge. So that was a little later, but what Steiger learned from the Harvester organization was this processes to test machines. This mean time between failure, there's reliability, some of the testing facilities that you have at Hinsdale. And if you've ever taken a tour of that, they still exist today. It's wonderful to take Case IH dealers do. I put on programs there for dealers, and one of the highlights is to take them dealers through the technology that is in that center, which by the way was a harvester farm where different machines were tested. And you take them through that, they see virtual reality, you see the test cells for engines and drivetrains. There's also a very interesting harvester heritage site there, which is where I first saw, after this, the Provine picture that Greg Embry did, and also we'll tell the story later about the Case IH logo. So,
absolutely. So, and I've got another honorable mention. And this is the Steiger 9300 series, and the impact here is the return of the Steiger name. So, when of course, as you know, in 1986, after Steiger was purchased by Tenneco, just like IH was, and then we have all of them under the same roof. Unfortunately, and Georgia talk a little bit about the painting of the green and the red. They quickly started painting them red and took the Steiger logo off. After a few years of that, Steiger was always very, very strong in Australia. The big country there, they had tremendous success starting in, I think it was the mid-70s, and was very popular. Well, the Australians got together and said, Steiger's not being used, we're gonna take this over. And Case IH started scrambling and discovered that, and of course they're talking to their advisors about this, and the first thing they found out is if you don't use it, you lose it. So Kelly Kravig has a great story about them just running out to the shop and printing off stickers and putting Steiger stickers on everything. And that was on older 9200. And the 9300, when they reintroduced Steiger, that was one of the biggest launches in their history. Mitch Kaiser talks about flying into Fargo, and you could see the line of cars on Highway 94 going in. They were backed up there. So the return of Steiger to Case IH makes the 9300 series, I think, an extremely important one for red machines.
Let's just, we'll skip ahead just a little bit, but it reinforces this point about the importance of you see the ads, and I was looking at them yesterday at one of the exhibits. The ad called big double-page fold-out spread said Steiger returns. It was a big deal. Why was it a big deal? It actually goes back to Magnum. And we'll talk a little bit more about the technical parts of Magnum and the importance of it, and we're kind of skipping ahead here, kind of previewing that because it's on the list. But that naming of a tractor, Steiger had it, was taken off after the success with Magnum, and then later Maxim. It was logical to bring back Steiger and give that, very strong name. When you're doing branding and branding experts, you want to have something that sounds powerful. It can't be more than 2 syllables. Magnum, Maxim, Steiger. That was the marketing significance of Steiger returns.
Absolutely. You don't hear many Petunian tractors, so. All right, for number 4, the 2+2.
So go back to my dad. I missed by one day seeing my dad's 2+2 being built at Rock Island when I was getting transferred from Kansas City, where I met Dan, to Chicago. And I told you my dad had always liked to have something new. He had a 4166, big heavy tillage tractor for the clay soils we have in Lake Champlain Valley of Vermont. 2+2 is introduced, he says, I'll have one of those. So he went to the dealership there, Farmall Sales and Service, and traded in his 4166 on a 2+2. Hooked the 2+2 up to the implements he had, went around the field the first time, got stuck. Said, this won't work. So he went back and bought the 4166 back, and we had both of them. The moral of the story is, and Lee writes about this very well, about Ron Berkey, big Case IH dealer that I worked with a lot, both at the company and at the dealership, about how the 2+2's concept needed to be understood well to sell it and use it well. So this was a row crop tractor with 4 equal wheels, so you had a better weight distribution and the ability to run the tractor faster, and at the end of the day get more work done, but you had to have it paired right with the right implements to do that. So you could still operate in row crop applications, but if you were doing other types of things, you had to match your implements right. My dad and the salesman didn't understand it. The successful Case IH dealers knew how to really sell the 2+2 concept well. It also introduced some other things from a technical standpoint that are important. The pressure and flow compensated hydraulic system was first introduced here, which is what made a more efficient tractor, that there was compensating both the pressure and flow, which you see on the Case IH tractors today. It also used axles from which were the source for the Steiger axles in Raba in Hungary. So you start seeing the international scope and some of the technology being brought in from with the Steiger acquisition. Always got a lot of questions about its style and its, with that long nose, and there were different names. But if you understood it and understood how the tractor bid, it did what it was supposed to do, which was to put efficient power to the ground in row crop applications. Had there been radar slippage indicator available at that time, then it might have been easier to sell, because many people didn't realize how much less slippage you were having in the applications, and therefore at the end of the day how much more work you were getting done. Guys like Ron Berkey would do that and did that well. The other thing that was interesting in this kind of picture that Jerry Salzman, who collaborated with Lee on the Combine book, this is his photo. Jerry and I are real good friends, we work together today, but this continues the theme of a nice launch. This is the Dick Van Dyke Studios, where the 2+2 was launched in Phoenix in 1979. So again, continuing that theme.
And Jerry loves to tell the story that there's a song, they hired a guy to write a song, and it was to the tune of Louise, I'm Gonna Leave You Louise, the Kenny Rogers song? Yeah. And it was yeah, thanks, I need some help on that one. But the fact they had that song just cracks me up. For next, we have an honorable mention, and that's the Super 70 series. Obviously, this was a line that they had finally refined and got the 2+2 right. And then, of course, when the Case IH merger came in, these tractors, they had produced just a handful of 30-some machines out there, and they pulled the pin and went with the Case four-wheel drives. And one of the things, George and I were talking at dinner last night, I learned quite a bit from George. There's more on that that he understood that I didn't even know. So George, can you share some of that?
So at that time, both Deere and Case and many other manufacturers were really focusing on more power to the ground and big MFDs on row crop tractors. That was where the industry was going. And also with bigger four-wheel drive tractors that were basically just brutes, just pulling tillage tractors. So that philosophy that was in the industry, and particularly at Case, because that's where Case's focus was on bigger tractors, not necessarily the smaller tractors, it was part of the reason why I think the 70 series wasn't continued. There were some other reasons as well, resources and a focus on Magnum, which we'll focus on in a second. But I think one of the differences you see, and you see it here at Red Power Showdown days, IH had a broad vision of a tractor line. So you had small tractors all the way down to Cub Cadets, all the way up to 4766 or whatever, 4786, with the Steiger. So there was a broad range in every different segment. Case needed to focus, rightly so, on competing against Deere, and where Deere's dominance in the big tractors needed to be overcome. The 2+2 didn't fit into that bigger MFD, bigger brutes, bigger strength. I think that was part of the reason. I wasn't there at the time, but looking back when I joined in '89 and having many people come to me when I was product director of Magnums and Steigers and saying, you need to bring back the 2+2. Because the people who understood it said the 70 series would have overcome a lot of the issues that the 3000 series 2+2 had in terms of durability and reliability, and also increased horsepower. So 70 series would have solved a lot of those.
And this is the picture I just couldn't resist putting in. This man is not a giant, obviously. This is a quarter scale model of a late gen Super 70. It's actually I don't know if you can see on there, it's a 7688 on the hood. Greg Montgomery calls this the Gen 4 70 series. So there was a number of additions they had drawn in the books, and were building quarter scale models that they never made. Any guesses on the next three, or the next one? All right, when we get to one, I'll actually want to hear a couple guesses. All right, the Farmall H. Obviously, you cannot have the Farmall H. Highest produced production tractor in IH history. And by the time I get my next book out, I'll know I believe it's the highest production tractor of any large tractor. But I'm working on that because we got to look at some numbers with Ford ends and a couple others. The letter series set the bar in a way that really no other tractor did. Developed during the Depression. International Harvester during the Depression was amazing. They had so much money in the bank. They never stopped paying dividends throughout those hard years. They had one year where sales, it went down by, it was 90 or 80, 90%. I don't remember the exact number. I want to say it was about $7 million. For the size of the company, they sold almost nothing. They paid their people. When they let people go, at least in 33, they gave them loans so they could take care of themselves until the company came back, and they poured money into investment. And that money showed up in a tractor they introduced in 1939. The styling was one of the most significant parts of it. It was styled by Raymond Loewy. Raymond Loewy is a famous industrial designer. He did locomotives and all kinds of well-known things. And that was a time when companies had figured out that style sold, and Loewy's group did a beautiful job. These machines, to this day, are absolutely gorgeous to look at. They had a couple things that were really interesting too. They also had a broad range of implements to go with it. So you could buy yourself a total package. They also had a sales and marketing machine that was just unrivaled. So this tractor, one of the interesting things about discussions about the top 10, these tractors purely on a technology basis, were not that innovative. They were a step, but they weren't really breaking a lot of ground. They were beautiful to look at, they were great to drive, they had every implement you could imagine, and they had a sales and marketing machine that was absolutely blowing it up. I have an honorable mention for the M. The H and the M, it's so tough. The M with more horsepower is arguably more popular. If you add all the variants, it's almost exactly the same in numbers. So these two machines, I think, when you talk about them, are similar. Obviously, the M with the higher horsepower was good. George, anything about Leinzer?
Nope. We got two more, and at least try to say, in your mind, what would be the top two?
Super MK and the Magnum.
All right, and any other?
Farmall regular.
Farmall what? Regular? What's a regular?
All right.
Super C, first fast hitch.
Oh, Super C. Got an outlier.
816 gear drive, one of the first small tractors. You can make a case that says that's the first utility tractor.
All right.
Oh boy.
The first guy there had one of them right, and that is what we had, Magnum. As Lee says in his book, the tractor that saved the brand. So the context, if you go back to the early 80s, and I left the company in 82 to go back to farm and sell computers to dairy farmers, and at that time, the company had, the guy from Schmidt Implement talked about, in his talk at that time, there was just 3 external events that were affecting the company's ability to be competitive. You had the grain embargo on the Soviet Union, which kind of put the agricultural economy in the tank, so people weren't buying things. You had interest rates that were going through the roof. That was the period of stagflation. And Archie McCardle, rightly or wrongly, took on the unions and wanted to change the union contract, and we took a 183-day strike to do that. Which in retrospect might have been good, because one of the things that there have been more executives in farm equipment companies that have lost their jobs because they kept the smokestacks running too long when the ag economy went down. Well, in this case, they weren't producing anything when the economy went down, so it might have been a good thing. But anyhow, that at that time, that was what led eventually to the powers that be between Case and IH coming together to purchase the agricultural equipment assets of International Harvester, combine them with Case, and today the brand is Case IH. Magnum. This was the first combined tractor, flagship tractor of the new brand in the new combined company. It had to work. It used a combination of the International Harvester transmission technology and drivetrain technology and the robust systems with the Case joint venture with Cummins of consolidated diesel, produced an excellent modern engine, efficient ability to control, and marrying that together with also the cab on Magnum meant that this was a tractor that the combined organizations could feel proud about. But it had to work. So when I started with the company in 1989 as product director for Steigers and Magnums, the tractor had been launched in Denver in the fall of 1987, had gone through one full year in 1988, and in the south here, in the other areas, had gone through the spring season. The regional manager in this area, the south, Herman Costin, invited me to go, more than an invitation. I was asked strongly by my boss to go through and look at Magnum owners and dealers in the south. And it was clear we had a problem. The hitch pins were failing almost daily. There were other issues with the buildup, particularly with cotton on the exhaust. The original exhaust had a flat surface on it. Material would build up there and would start fires. There were several other issues, but those were fundamentally the two. So at that time, in 1989, we started on what was then the largest update program in the company's history to get Magnum right. So we went through and went back to touched every tractor, did the updates, fixed the hitch pin, fixed the exhaust, which had a round surface, basically a tube coming out the side, so it would shed off material. And here we are today in terms of that. Good decisions meant Magnum means reliability. It was also significant from a marketing standpoint, in addition to having the name Magnum back to the branding we talked about, it was the first tractor to have a 5-year, 5,000-hour warranty. Back on the 50 series, they introduced a 3-year, 2,500-hour warranty. Again, back to this mean time between failures, this testing and quantification of reliability. There was confidence in the system in saying, we're going to actually make an impact in the marketplace by offering a warranty that nobody else has that says to the customer or the prospect, this tractor will live, and we'll stand behind it with a warranty. So Magnum started out with that, and it's grown, and still is that name for reliability. The other thing that was significant was, and in terms of promotion, was how proud the combined organizations felt about this new tractor. I was a region sales manager in Illinois and Wisconsin. I had a dealer in Streeter, Illinois, who bought from another Case IH dealer a Magnum balloon. Has anybody here ever seen the Magnum balloon? So the story is this. Dealer in Western Canada, proud of this new tractor. He said, he was a real promoter. He said, I want to get a hot air balloon in the shape of a Magnum tractor. So he had a balloon designer design it. Nowhere in North America could you build this complex design. So they sent the designs over to UK, United Kingdom, because they could, the company did that. Balloon gets manufactured, comes back, and they're inflating it for the first time. Here the dealer is next to the designer. As the hot air is being put in there, the designer starts shaking his head. And the dealer says, what's wrong? He says, it's not supposed to be that big. They confused feet with yards. The tractor is 3 times the size it's supposed to be. See the little scale over here? See the people here? I've actually helped inflate that balloon at the Racine County Fair. You have to have like 30 people around, and you have to make sure that there's no wind gusts because it's so big. Now they actually have got it up in the air. You can see a little gondola there. This just shows you the power of bigness and the people wanting to promote things, want to do the right thing. So that was a fun deal, real true story. And you see the pictures. Look for that the next time out in Albuquerque. Sometimes they have it out there. We've got one other honorable mention, and that is the 7150. Goes back to the 1206, the first row crop tractor over 100 horsepower. Here he had the first big row crop tractor over 200 horsepower. Not in the original Magnum lineup, but the desire for a bigger tractor was there. The appetite was there. And so there were like with the 806 to the 1206, but there had to be a lot of engineering to push the limits on a 215 horsepower tractor. The 7140 was 195. So it had things like the wastegate turbo, it had higher pressure injection, it had 4-inch axles and supports, it had bigger hitch cylinders, 2 1/4 inch versus 1 3/4 to handle heavier hitch mounted equipment like here in the south. It had a 22 frame front weight carrier versus the normal 18, and it had an option for a 95-gallon fuel tank. Plus it needed to have the reliability, which is why we stepped into it to make sure it would live before it would release to full production. So we had some limited production here in the south before it achieved full production.
This also was a tractor that kind of went to the drawing board twice. They had prototypes ready to go, and they decided to test them, and so they took them to I believe it was the Phoenix testing grounds, and they badged the 7150s as 7140s, and they put farmers in to blind test them. And people, the first time they did that, the results were pretty lukewarm. The tractor just didn't have enough power. The product manager, who at the time it was Vicki Ricky,
Yeah, she's the marketing manager.
marketing manager said, nope, we're not going to release this. It doesn't have enough power. They took another year, did a lot more development, did the blind test again. Everybody said, this thing's awesome, I want one, and they brought it out.
That's right. So that testing, and I started with Case working for Vicki Ricky. She was the vice president for product and marketing, and very good instincts, and that was the right call for sure to make sure that the tractor did have that noticeable difference. And one of the things that was also changed, you see visually here, the lower models didn't have this side panel right here, which was how we needed to get more air flow into the engine. So that's the one way you could tell a 7150 from other models because of that.
And next up, we have an honorable mention. This is a machine brought to my attention by George when we were doing the red 4-wheel drive tractor. And they actually, there's actually in Burr Ridge, the prototype still sitting there of a Magnum 2+2.
Yeah, so again, we had lots of people saying with the Magnum design and technology, bring back the 2+2. It didn't happen. But here's the fact, kind of like that Skunkworks thing, people tried to get it done another way.
Yeah, they played with it. There was a couple engineers in particular who loved it. Any guesses on number 1? Any other guesses? 806, all right, that's interesting. Any good, Jim?
I'm going to go with regular.
All right. Well, correct. You can't miss the Farmall regular. And the reason I think this was a fairly clear number 1, it just was such an amazing game changer. At this time, if you go back to the 1920s, nobody had figured out how to make a tractor that could cultivate as well as plow, as well as power a belt. And today that's kind of seems simple, but back then it was not. Nobody could figure it out. And one of my favorite parts of this story, and I think one of the most interesting parts, is that at the time, IH was all in on the McCormick Deering line. So that was developed at exactly the same time. And the McCormick Deering line was developed by a big committee. It was their large group of engineers. And if you go way back from the merger, IH had many different engineering departments. Obviously with the Titans and the Moguls, those of you who know those tractors, there's two completely different lines by two completely different engineering groups. There was also an engineering group that had been at Deering Works that was doing things. So there was a lot of different groups. And that sort of kept happening. The McCormick Deering, though, from management top down, everybody was stinging because Fordson had just eaten their lunch. Fordson came out of nowhere and was selling them for a while there 2-to-1, 3-to-1 on what they would sell, killing them. So they were like, we're going to respond. And the McCormick Deering took really the Fordson layout and then took all their engineering horsepower. And the McCormick Deering was a phenomenal piece of engineering. Just right down to the detail. As probably some of you know, the engine bearings to this day have a lifetime warranty. So if you need bearings for your McCormick Deering engine, it's a lifetime warranty. So they had pulled out all the stops, but they weren't innovating. In another part of the company, a man named Bert Benjamin was working on the motor cultivator. And the motor cultivator was the funkiest, ugliest, most terrible machine. It was supposed to, it was a 3-wheeled contraption that was supposed to just cultivate. And there was a lot of people in the industry who put a lot of money into these things. Nobody really sold many. Benjamin was working on that, and he was convinced he could make it work. So he started working on this Farmall. And as he did, Alexander Legg at that time was the head of the entire engineering group, and Legg kept feeding him enough money to keep him working. And Legg would believe in him. Legg would also get frustrated. There's a lot of correspondence between him and some. Legg was very fiery, and Legg's like, Benjamin, you got to make this happen. You know, I'm giving you money, but nothing's going on. In the early 20s, they had these Farmalls running, and everybody said it's funny. You compare that tricycle to all, say, a McCormick Deering. It was much like the 2+2. There was a real negative reaction to that look. But, so what they decided to do was, with one of the early runs, was send them somewhere they hadn't been. So they sent them to Texas. They had been thrown out of Texas at that market as part of the antitrust suit, and they were slowly re-entering Texas. So they didn't have a lot of presence down there. So they sent a bunch of Farmall regulars, early production ones, and were gathering responses. And a famous letter that was sent back from Texas, because International was convinced that the McCormick Deering was their next thing. That's where all their ad dollars were going. That's where all their energy was going. Regular was this thing that wouldn't go away. When the guys in Texas tested it, one of the sales manager wrote a letter to the head office in Chicago, and he said, you don't build it, we will. And that really was the turning point where they started ramping up production on that original Farmall. And as you in this room know, I believe, it absolutely changed the industry. It was the machine that really allowed the small farmer to buy one. It was the first one that was the most legitimate replacement for the horse. You know, this was the biggest, this was when IH actually dominated the market and absolutely changed the game. In my mind, it's got to be number one.
Let's just follow on the replacement of the horse and tell you two things, personal reflections on the Farmall. First of all, if you go through the engineering center, which is now at Burr Ridge, which is at where I-55 comes into 294 in southwest Chicago, and you go into the lobby there, you see a historic plaque on the wall, which is by the Ag Engineering Society, designating that site as an historic site because that's where Farmall tractor, this tractor, was tested. The engineering was, at that time, was in downtown Chicago. Was factory there, but IH had purchased a farm in that area, and that's historic because of the testing of this tractor there. You also, if you go there, you also see Cyrus McCormick's anvil, which is interesting, which of course from Steele's Tavern, Virginia. But Lee mentioned about the change from horses, and we've been trying to kind of connect some thoughts and some themes across the years. Higher horsepower, how to get more power to the ground, some of the marketing launches, some of the innovation. So the story about, when we talk about change from horses, when I was a regional sales manager in Illinois and Wisconsin, another dealer, Stoller International in Pontiac, we were giving them an award for being a International Harvester dealer for 75 years. They've got an International Harvester refrigerator in their break room like a lot of IH dealers. And the mother of the two principals, Clark and Lynn Stoller, was telling stories about what she remembered as a child. And she says, I remember early in my childhood that there used to be a corral in the middle and out in front of the dealership, because we were still trading in horses on tractors. That was in effect our used equipment lot, was the horses that were there, our mules that we were traded in. So you see that evolution. Here's the Farmall with steel wheels. You go to rubber tracks and or to rubber tires, and now we're on to tracks, rubber tracks. So you kind of see that, kind of tie that together.
Absolutely. Traction and horsepower were all we talked about at dinner last night. Well, most. That's our presentation. We do have a couple things I want to mention. We've got some of our books in the back here if you'd like to take a look. Our Red Tractors books. Also, this top 10, these tractors, maybe not all these tractors, will be part of my book, Tractor. That's coming out in the fall. You can pre-order that. And I reserve the right to change my mind and change the order and move it around a little bit. I know Jim's got some thoughts on that. Also, today, our booth is over in the Garrett Carl. And if you'd like something signed by George, he did the red four-wheel drive. He'll be here just for an hour. We'll be here a little bit, and we'll be over at the Octane Press booth, which is in the Garrett Coliseum. And today, come see us. We've got Max Armstrong's going to come. He wrote the foreword for this new version of Red Tractors. We have his book, Stories from the Heartland. He'll be signing books from 3:30 to 5. We also have a great raffle. We're raffling off a matched serial number set of our books. If you don't know about those, stop and see them. We have books that have serial numbers just like IH tractors. There's only 8 of these match sets left. We're raffling one of them off. So if you win, you get the match set, and there's some other goodies there, some books and some toys and good stuff. We also will have some cold drinks, which I think are going to be pretty good about 3:30 today. So cold, non-alcoholic drinks, just to be specific. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, George. It's a pleasure.
Good. It's been a pleasure.